All right, welcome back. Today I'm going to cover section 2.2, which deals with cell structure and organelles. So I'm going to talk about two different types of cells, prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, discuss some similarities and how they're different, and then talk about the structures inside the cell and what each one does. So we have a lot of notes to go through, so bear with me. Feel free to pause and write them down and then resume. So the cell can come in many different shapes and sizes. Just looking at some human cells, by the way, you have over 100 different types of cells inside your body, but red blood cells, you take a look at this cell and it's kind of like a donut shaped. And what's the purpose of a red blood cell? Well, its job is to carry oxygen to the cells and then pick up carbon dioxide so you can breathe it out. And so this cell structure is perfect. It's super, super small. It holds that oxygen right in the middle, kind of looks like an inner tube going down the lazy river of your circulatory system to deliver that oxygen. This columnar epithelial cells, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. You can see that they kind of looks like tiny little hairs. And so these epithelial cells, what they do is they line the openings to your body. So you have epithelial cells in your nasal passages, your airway, and these tiny little hairs, they trap dust particles. And then when you sneeze and cough, it's just the cilia, trying to get rid of that dust and pollen and pathogens, whatever it got trapped in the hair cells there. So, a lot of times the shape of the cell is related to the job or the function that it does. One more great example, the nerve cell. So here we have a nerve cell. You can kind of see we have tiny little branches coming out here. And the purpose of that is we have neurons playing a giant game of telephone all the time. So they want to reach out and be able to talk to as many neurons as possible to send that nerve impulse. So it will receive a nerve impulse and travel down the axon to the dendrite and pass it on to the next neuron. So, like I said, related to their function. Their shape is related to their function. So starting on the outside of a cell is the cell membrane. And it's this flexible covering that protects the inside of the cell from the environment outside a cell. It's the barrier. It's it's what makes the cell, the boundary of a cell to its environment. It's made up of two different macromolecules, proteins and lipids. And there's one special function of lipids that we really, pounded in 2.1. Lipids do not dissolve in water. Okay, so that makes them a perfect barrier to be used in making our cell membrane. Another thing about cell membranes is that it does allow some things through, but not everything through. So I know this might be an outdated analogy, but a cell membrane is kind of like a club bouncer. They stand outside a club and they only allow certain people into the club. If you're on the list, you can come in. If you're not, you can't. And so that's what a cell membrane does with molecules. If you're not on the list, you're not coming inside the cell. Okay, now some organelles have another layer, called the cell wall. It's a stiff structure. It's found outside the cell membrane. Only some organisms have the cell wall, like bacteria, depicted down here. Looks like a Mike and Ike. Plants have a cell wall. Their cell wall is made up of cellulose, which is a carbohydrate, and fungi. They have a cell wall. It's not made of cellulose. It's made of a different substance called chitin, but I'm, just going past what you really need to know here. But bacteria, plants, and fungi have a cell wall. And what the cell wall does is it protects the cell from virus attacks as well as other harmful organisms. It adds that extra layer of protection. It can also help maintain a cell's shape, provide that structural support. So bacteria, their environment can change very rapidly. And so with their cell wall, that cell wall can help prevent water loss or from water entering the cells so it doesn't explode. Plant cells, they have a cell wall made of cellulose. It gives it structure, support, rigidity. I'm not sure if that's even a word, but plants grow vertical and they're not limp, they're not wilty, except for when they lose water. Okay, but cell walls. Okay, some cells can have appendages. So an appendage is kind of like a limb. Like for us, our appendages would be our arms and our legs. Well, cells can have appendages too, and it's used in movement. And there are two types of cell appendages I want to discuss here. The flagella, which is a long tail-like structure that whips back and forth. So you can kind of see that on this bacteria cell, we do have a flagella, this long tail-like structure. And so it spins like a propeller or undulates like a snake in some species, but it helps them move it in their environment. Or they can have short hair-like structures. So this looks like a hairy Mike and Ike, called cilia. Short hair-like structures that move the cell or molecules to the cell. So our trachea is lined with cilia. Here's a picture up close of an electron microscope of pollen getting stuck in cilia. Here is, I think this is a paramecium with cilia on the outside, and they're acting like tiny little oars to help them move in its environment. Okay, cytoplasm and cytoskeleton. So within the cell membrane or the cell wall, we have a structure called the cytoplasm, and it's a fluid jelly-like substance. It contains salts and other molecules, but it just kind of fills the cell. I don't want to say it's like the blood of the cell, but it's everywhere inside that cell. And within that cytoplasm, you may find a cytoskeleton. And so cyto means cell, so cell, plasm, like plasma, cell, skeleton. Well, what does a skeleton do for us? Well, it's like a framework. It keeps us, in our human shape. If we didn't have a skeleton, we would just be blobs rolling around on the floor. So cytoskeleton, or a cell skeleton, is a network of proteins that join together and give the cell shape, and it can also help them move. Okay, but it's protein fibers. They're crisscrossed on the inside here. Here you can see all these little fibers here. There's different types of cytoskeletons, like actin filaments, intermediate filaments, microtubules, and they all do different jobs, but really they're giving that cell structure support and might help in movement. Okay, there are two broad types of cells, okay? Prokaryotic cells, and then the other one's called eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotic cells are organisms that do not have a nucleus. Instead, their genetic material is not surrounded by a membrane, or the nucleus, and it's kind of just exposed to the cytoplasm. They also do not have organelles. And if you take a look at this word organelles, it has the word organ in it. Okay, so organelles actually means tiny organs. Cells can have tiny organs, kind of like how we have organs. So I'll discuss organelles in depth on the next slide here, but prokaryotic cells don't have organelles. Most prokaryotic cells are unicellular. So that prefix uni means one-celled, and they are very, very, very small. So an example of a prokaryotic cell is a bacteria cell, which I've depicted up here. You can see the cell wall, the cell membrane, there's the cytoplasm, there's our DNA, there's no membrane that covers it, no other organelle really. Here's that flagellum, and then these cilia-like structures. So that's prokaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells do have their genetic material covered by a membrane, and we call that membrane a nucleus, and we'll discuss nucleus coming up here. They have organelles. Organelles are structures that have specialized functions, so tiny organs. Well, if you think about the organs inside of us, each organ kind of carries out a job. Like a stomach helps aid in digestion. Your eyes, that's an organ, helps you see. Your brain, kind of like helps you control everything that's kind of going on. So, each organ has its own job, or organelles, each organelle kind of has its own job as well. Eukaryotic cells can be unicellular or multicellular, and they are a lot larger than prokaryotes. In fact, you can take 10 prokaryotes and fit it into a eukaryote. Examples of eukaryotic cell, any animal. So humans, we are animals, so we are eukaryotic. That means we have nucleuses, or nuclei and organelles, okay? Plant cells, fungi, protist. We'll discuss what a protist is later on this year. Okay, moving on to the tiny little organelles. So there are a lot of different organelles inside the cell. So the first one I want to discuss is the nucleus. The nucleus directs cell activities, and it also stores that genetic information called DNA. DNA can be organized into chromosomes or chromatin, okay? Another thing I want to point out is inside the nucleus, you can kind of see this dark blue area. That's called the nucleolus. And the nucleolus' job is to make ribosomes. Now, I know you probably don't even know what a ribosome is, but a ribosome, which you'll see on the next slide, makes proteins. So that's where the ribosomes come from. The nucleus, this entire structure, does have a membrane, and we call that membrane a nuclear envelope. So in summary, nucleus, in the center of it is nucleolus, and the membrane that covers or makes up the nucleus is a nuclear envelope. Okay, cells can make molecules. Okay, so one organelle that can make molecules is a ribosome. It can be found in the cytoplasm or a structure called the endoplasmic reticulum. Yeah, big word. But its main job is to make proteins. Another organelle that can make molecules is the endoplasmic reticulum. So it's this web-like structure right here, and it makes proteins and lipids. Now, if you come across ER, endoplasmic reticulum, ER, that has ribosomes, and you look at it, imagine if you could take your hand and just like brush it across the surface. It might feel rough, okay? So we call it rough ER because it has these ribosomes embedded into it. That's how endoplasmic reticulum make proteins, is because of those ribosomes. If you come across endoplasmic reticulum that do not have ribosomes, then we call it smooth ER, okay? And they tend to make lipids. Smooth ER can also help remove harmful substances. Okay, moving on to organelles that can process energy. And there's going to be two of them here. Mitochondria. Mitochondria is this bean-shaped organelle that can process energy. And it makes this energy molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is the energy molecule that powers everything inside of the cell. So the cell's energy factories, mitochondria manufactures ATP to fuel all of life's activities. You might have heard that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Trust me, I mean, it is. It really is. It's kind of like the energy plant. It provides energy for the cell to carry out all of life's processes. Another organelle that deals with energy is the chloroplast. What the chloroplast does is it absorbs light energy, and with light, water, and carbon dioxide, it makes food, and this food is sugar or glucose. We tend to find chloroplast only in photosynthetic organisms like plants and some species of bacteria. So we do not have chloroplast, okay? But we do eat organisms that do have chloroplast. Remember, you can trace all energy back to the sun. Like imagine what you had for lunch. So at lunch today was chicken parmesan, right? So you ate the chicken. Chicken is an animal. It eats grain. Grain is a type of plant. And the plant gets its energy from the sun. You can trace everything back to the sun. So what I'm trying to say here is without chloroplast, we wouldn't be able to convert this light energy into food. So thank you, chloroplast, for taking in sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide and turning it into something that we can use. Sugar, glucose, yum. Okay, enough about energy processing. Talk about some these. I think this is our last slide of organelles here. Organelles that can process things, that can move things or store things. So the Golgi apparatus, another big fancy word, what it does is it helps prepares proteins for specific jobs or functions. Okay, and it can also package proteins into vesicles. These membrane-bound ball-like structures, kind of think of it as like, cardboard boxes, shipping it somewhere. And these vesicles can leave or enter the cell. So I had a science teacher that told me that the Golgi apparatus was almost kind of like a UPS facility because it receives, or maybe even Amazon, like an Amazon warehouse. It receives merchandise. Okay, so you can say it takes the merchandise or takes the protein and packages it and slaps an address label on where its final destination is, and then that package will leave. Lysosomes are kind of like the garbage men of the cell. They contain substances on the inside that help break down and recycle cellular components. So if an organelle gets damaged and it's like useless, then the lysosomes will come and just recycle those molecules so that they can be put to use elsewhere. Vacuoles are organelles that can store water or food or even waste material. In fact, plants have something called a central vacuole that holds water, and when it's full, then the plant is like upright, and when it's empty, then plants tend to wilt. Vacuoles are very common in plants. Okay, so I know I went through that super, super fast, but that's the gist of the organelles that you're going to need to know for this chapter. Thank you.